Okay, I know that we still have some people joining us and probably will for the next several minutes, but I know Alison's got a lot to get to today and wants to be sure to leave lots of time for questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grant Writing for Congregational Leaders with Alison Cunningham. I'm Kelly Morrissey, Managing Director of the Center for Continuing Education at Yale Divinity School. Thank you for being with us. Megan Lukens, our communication coordinator, is also on with us today. So if you're experiencing any kind of technical issues with Zoom, please feel free to reach out to Megan. Just a quick note on how our session is going to work today before I introduce Alison. Alison is going to stop and take questions at a couple different points during the presentation. So when she invites you to submit questions, please post them in the chat, and I'll help to manage those for her. If there are questions we don't get to, or if there's anything that you'd like some additional detail on, Alison has graciously agreed to stay on for a bit after we wrap up the presentation, so feel free to stay on for that. And now I would like to introduce our guest speaker. Born and raised in Texas, Alison Cunningham has called New Haven home since 1982, when she left her home state to attend Yale Divinity School. She graduated with a Master's of Divinity in 1982, and from there found her calling and work with people who experience homelessness. She did her first work in this field with young people in Bridgeport before moving into work with adults experiencing homelessness through Columbus House. From 1998 to 2019, she led the organization as CEO, developing a continuum of services and housing that move people from homelessness to housing. She sat on numerous statewide and local boards and committees, always moving toward the vision of ending homelessness. In 2019, Alison left Columbus House to move into the position of Director of Professional Formation at Yale Divinity School, working directly with students who are interested in nonprofit and justice-seeking work. Alison, thank you so much for being with us today. If you will unmute yourself, please take it away.
Well, thanks for reminding me to unmute myself, because I would have gone for the next few minutes. So hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. It's a little weird to be on a webinar and I can't see all your faces, but I'm delighted that you're here, and thank you so much for joining us. Give me a minute and let me pull up this PowerPoint that I want to share with you today. Let's see, how come that won't go? Here we go. All right, good. Okay, so I just want to start by letting you know my background a little bit. And that is that as Kelly said, I worked at Columbus House for a number of years, and for the first 10 years, at least, I was the grant writer. So I've written a few in my time. I wish I could tell you how many, but it's been a lot. And I hope that the experience that I've gained and the understanding that I've gained over those many, many years will be of use here. I've written government grants, foundation grants, church grants, all kinds of things. And I've been pretty successful. I will say that I've been awarded, or my organization was awarded a lot of grants, but I've also been rejected. Well, I should say the organization was rejected. The application was rejected. Of course, I took it personally, and so will you if you don't get the first grant that you apply for or the 10th grant that you apply for. But don't let that stop you from trying again. The thing about a rejection letter is that there's a lot to learn there. And so there are funders who will actually do a debriefing session with you and go over the grant with you and tell you maybe why they didn't fund you. Don't let them say, well, there was a lot of competition, because yeah, you know that. Of course, there was a lot of competition. They need to give you some specifics and learn from that. And then the next time around, you will be ready to write a little bit of a different grant. So I have some goals for today. I want us to become familiar with the general process of grant writing, the application process, what's all involved. And it's more than just writing the grant itself. So we'll talk about what comes before, what comes after. I will clarify some of the key components. We'll actually go through a list of what those are, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them. And I want to help reduce any fear or anxiety you might be feeling about writing that grant that's sitting in your inbox right now. So we'll see how that works. We'll do a little poll at the end of the session to see how many of you feel any better. So where are they? I have listed 4 areas where you can look. There are grants out in all kinds of places, but because you are here to learn about grant writing for church leaders, I'm assuming that you are connected to a denomination, and there are lots of grants through your denomination that you can find. You just need to be on the website. You need to look around. You need to know kind of how to look for those opportunities through your denomination. And it's not just through the website, but it's through talking to folks in those offices to find out where are they, what's coming up, what's new, what are they thinking about, and even talk to them about what is needed on the local level so that they start to think about where they can administer those grants that might make more sense for all of us on the ground, as we like to say. So there are denominational grants, there are family foundations, there are family foundations all over the country. You kind of need to know how to find them. You know, Google is our best friend in all of these situations. You can Google till you're green in the face, or blue in the face. But there are ways to find family foundations, and sometimes your community foundation people will know who are the family foundations in your area. Sometimes your board members, your vestry members, they will know who is holding some family money that have created foundations that might actually fund the kinds of things you're looking for. So it takes a little digging, but you can find those. Almost in every community, or larger communities, there are community foundations. Speaking from New Haven, there's the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven. There's the Community Foundation in Guilford, in Middletown, and Hartford. So they're dotted all around the state of Connecticut. I'm sure they're in your state as well. You just need to Google the community foundations and find out who they are. And then, of course, there's scads and scads of government grants. And you may not think you're eligible for any of those, but we'll talk about those in a minute. I want to share kind of what I'm hearing too and seeing as I look at these areas, and that is attention is really being paid, and some people say, well, this is post-pandemic. Well, I'm not sure we're in post-pandemic, but because of all the things that have emerged across the country in the past 4 years, there's a little bit of a shift in focus for those community foundations and family foundations, and even denominational grants. And I'm seeing more focus on, of course, racial justice and equity. Some funders are actually shifting all of their grant making and are only giving to programs that will benefit people of color, marginalized communities, people living in poverty. It's a little bit different twist on giving than I've seen before. So that language is important to understand. What do they mean by equity? What do they mean by racial justice? What is it that you're doing that might fit within that? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Of course, all 4 of these areas that we've talked about are going to fund basic needs grants. So food, housing, shelter, clothing, those are the basics that most foundations will give toward. But then there are other foundations when we talk about places like Lilly and Templeton and some of those nationwide foundations that are giving to programs that are on a much bigger scale. And we'll get more into that in just a few minutes. Okay, so great, there they all are, but how on earth do you weed through all this and how do you find them? That's always the challenge. There are digests or databases that you can find. I've listed some of them here. The Foundation Center is a good one, fconline.foundationcenter.org. Grants.gov, you can find every government grant that's out there you can find through grants.gov. Some of these others have particular directions that they list: Grantscape, GrantStation, GrantWatch, Foundation Directory online. Those are pretty broad, but then here's fundsnetservices.com/religion. And there I found lots of grants, again, all over the country, small family foundations and others that are funding churches and congregations. Some of these digests and databases are going to charge you a fee to look at them. Well, you don't want to pay that because, you might find one in this giant haystack. So go to the library and find out what subscriptions do they have and use those subscriptions there, and then you don't have to pay. And libraries are pretty good about having access to some of these foundation databases and digests. The other thing is, if you find a foundation that you're interested in, get on their website, go and look directly there, get on their mailing list, find out who they are. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And of course, you already are on all your denominational websites. So you found a funder and you think, this is one that's going to fund my congregation to do what we want to do next. Well, not so fast. Just because Lilly says we fund work that will deepen and enrich the religious lives of Christians in the United States doesn't mean they're going to fund you. So the homework that we all have when we're in this business of grant writing is to understand who all these funders are. So this family foundation that I found in New Haven, are they going to fund me? Well, all right. So then you need to understand, what is their mission? What is their work in the world? How does that relate to what I want to do? Or does it at all? Do I fit? Does it feel like they may align with, or we might align with what they're doing? One way to find that out is to meet the program officer, and all of these have program officers. It's the staff person in the foundation who's there to talk to you. They're the ones that are going out and visiting the organizations that they fund. They're getting to know you. You need to reach out and get to know them. And this is true for denominational funders, for community funders. It's true for all of them. Maybe not so much the government work, but for all the others, it is very true that you want to make sure you know who they are and that they know who you are. I'll give you an example about how things can kind of get a little wonky in this world of funding. So if you are an NPR listener, you will have heard the ad from the Melville Charitable Trust. And if we were live and in person, I would say, and what do they say about the Melville Charitable Trust? And you would answer, well, they're working to end homelessness. And if I was still at Columbus House, I would say, oh, great, they're going to fund me. I'm going to go ask them for money. Well, no, they're not. They're not going to fund me because the Melvilles fund organizations that have impact across the country in policy work and systems work, and that's not Columbus House. So they're not going to fund me at Columbus House to do advocacy work or policy work on the local level. They're going to fund the National Alliance to End Homelessness and the Coalition to End Homelessness and the LISC and other national organizations. You might look at the Lilly Foundation and say, well, what do they do? How maybe they'll fund me, and maybe they will, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to just repeat this, that it's really important to understand what is the mission and what are these funders about. And you can get that from their website. So you don't have to go too far down that path and find out, 3 months into your exploration that in fact they're not going to fund you. You can see pretty clearly whether they're funding local programs such as yours or not. So I said in the beginning there, meet the program officer. If they are sponsoring public events, go. Of course, you're going to go to denominational meetings, that's a given, but you might want to go to a community foundation event. Maybe they're holding some webinar like this about some particular area of interest. Just kind of show up every now and again to get a sense of who they are, what they're seeing in the community, how they're talking about issues in the community, because you're going to use that information that you're gleaning when you then go to write that grant. I mean, not word for word. You understand what I mean. You just want to get kind of the sense of who are these people and what's of concern to them and how are they thinking about the issues that we're trying to tackle when we go to write these grants. When I say use social media, follow them online if you do that. Sometimes they post on LinkedIn, sometimes they post in places like Instagram or something. If you're there, look for them. It may not make any difference at all, but some of you may want to actually look at what are these organizations talking about in their social media posts. Okay, so we're going to get to know the funders. Now, what are they looking for? You will find the criteria kind of generally when you look at a funder's webpage. There's usually a tab that says, what do we fund, or grants, or something that will take you to that next link. And then you can see, okay, for this particular grant that we're going to offer next month, here are the criteria. And I've looked at a couple of opportunities that I've seen out just currently, and these are general. They're not all of the criteria, but there's some of the general things that you just want to look for when you're looking at their websites and their funding announcements. So most people, I will say, most funders these days are looking for collaboration. And I remember sitting in a meeting with some organizations once upon a time at Columbus House, and Jerry Ross said, the hardest work in the world is collaboration. It'd just be a lot easier if we could do this on our own. Well, yes, it is. But guess what? The impact isn't as big and broad and deep and meaningful. And so the work that you want to do, the work that your funders want you to do, is with partners in the community. And I'm going to say more about this in a little bit. You also might find that they will fund organizations whose budget are under a certain amount. So there are some that target smaller organizations whose annual budget may be under $10,000 or $25,000. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you fit there. If you have $1 million annual budget, don't apply for something that's intended for a $25,000 budget, because they won't even look at your application. Another piece of the criteria is, who are you serving? What is the population that you're most interested in? It could be your congregation. Well, who is that? And what are the demographics? And who's there? Who's coming to church on Sunday? Or who's not coming to church on Sunday? And then they're also going to want to know, or they may tell you, we will fund this for a year, or maybe we're going to fund this for 5 years. So just make sure that you know those things. Because you don't want to go down the path thinking that this is an opportunity for you, only to find out that you don't meet the criteria. The advice that I will give you when you think about the criteria is, be true to who you are as you look at the aims of the funder, and don't try to be something you're not. If collaboration is not something that you think about for this particular thing that you want to find money for, then don't say that you're going to collaborate. If they want you to serve a particular population and you're not doing that now and you have no intention of it, don't say that you will. So be honest. which I know you will be, but I needed to say that. All right, so requirements. The Community Foundation of Greater New Haven wants to serve people in their target area, which is the Greater New Haven area, obviously. The Episcopal Church has got a grant out now for eco-justice, and it's across the country. So that's a really different geographic area. Just be clear, you know what your funder is looking for. So if it's New Haven, great, stay in New Haven. If it's in San Jose, stay in San Jose. Just be clear about that. If you are applying for any kind of government grants, be sure that they are going to ask you to comply with local, state, federal anti-discrimination laws. And you will have to sign documents saying that you will comply with those laws. And they'll give you a list of them, and they'll provide you with links to language about those laws. Now, most of you aren't going to apply for this kind of funding, but you may be in partnership with others that do. So don't worry so much about this right now, but just know that that's part of those kinds of applications. And of course, folks have to be tax exempt. Now, I know that I run the risk of all of you jumping off this webinar when you see religious activities highlighted here, but let me explain what that means. And I'm not talking about denominational grants now. I'm talking about community foundations, family foundations, all those other grants that you're going to apply for. They may or may not pay for you to expand your Bible study groups. They may or may not, probably not, pay for you to do something different with worship services. So they're not going to pay for religious activities, but that doesn't mean they won't fund you to do other things. So, for example, you might get a grant from a family foundation or a community foundation to fix the leak in your roof. So that's not a religious activity, but they will fund you for capital improvements. You might be able to get a grant to do something with your RE wing so that you can rent it out for a child care program. Wow, that would be a great thing. Not necessarily a religious activity, right? But they will fund you as a religious organization. So don't hang up. Don't get off the webinar because you see that. You cannot get a grant to put money into your endowment. None of us can do that, sadly. We'd love to. We'd love to grow that endowment, wouldn't we? Because we see it shrinking. But no, you can't do that. You can't get money for lobbying, and you can't get money to pay off your mortgage. They just don't like to do that. So those are things that you need to be aware of. I mentioned the Episcopal grant that I've seen recently that is for environmental justice work. So it's interesting when talking about kind of what you have to sign on to or sign off on. I'm imagining that they're not the only ones that are doing this kind of grant where they want you to sign on to their commitment to become net zero by 2050, or something like that. So those are not hard and fast laws that you have to sign on to or sign on about your compliance, but they are aspirational goals that they may want you to say, yes, we agree with this goal in this way. So you may find that along the way. Okay. So when you start out, and again, before you get to specific program funding, foundations, government funding, even denominational funding will put their timelines on their websites. Timeline, when is it open? When are the due dates? When is the review process? When will it be funded? Make sure you know that. The worst thing that can happen is you think, oh, I really want to apply for this grant. And then you get so busy because you've got sermons to prepare and funerals and weddings and baptism, all kinds of things going on and pastoral care. And the next thing you know, that timeline is come and gone and you missed it. Ouch, that hurts. I know an organization that I'm involved with that just missed the deadline in a similar way. And ouch, that really hurts. So keep up with that. Make a little note on your computer on a little sticky. Use these little yellow things that say, oh, I remember that the UCC has got a funding thing out now and the due date is March 30th. I have to remember that. Don't let those dates go by. And then know the difference in the kinds of grants that are out there. So, wearing my nonprofit hat, I think in terms of, oh, we want to start a new program. Oh, we want to do something new. This is a specific program that we're going to fund. I also think about, oh gosh, my building is old and I better get a new roof, or we want to put on solar panels, or I need to redo my driveway, whatever capital support it is. So if it's capital support, you need to look for capital funds, which some organizations do. I'm sure that denominations have some funding for that to help you cover the cost of an aging building. Some community foundations do. I don't know about city funding, if they would do kind of capital grants. It's worth exploring in your state if that's a possibility. General operating is money that we all want. Oh, we desperately want, and especially now as our congregations are declining in membership and maybe our stewardship is down. We really need money just to keep the doors open, right? I've got to pay my staff. I've got to pay our operating expenses, keeping the lights on, keeping the heat on, doing those kinds of things. Well, guess what? General operating support is the absolute hardest to find because funders have, they're like, oh, we want to do this new shiny thing. We don't want to pay for that. You all should be able to find money. Well, where am I supposed to find money to do that? Well, that's where your stewardship comes in. However, there are some ways to find that, and you just need to know to look for general operating support. During COVID, there was more of that kind of funding available. I think everybody understood that we were all working in really difficult and very tight financial times. There may still be some money like that available. I think it's dwindling and drying up, but there may still be some somewhere along the way through your denominations. I've actually seen some on the UCC website, although last time I looked, those opportunities were already closed. But do look. But then there are specific program areas, and I've named a few, like the Episcopal Creation Care. That's a grant that's out now. I don't know the deadline. I didn't look for that specifically. The UCC Neighbor Need Fund, I think that's the one that is closed, but it was funding basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, etc. There's an interesting one on the Unitarian Universalist Association's website for community organizing. And it's fairly broad. It doesn't say community organizing around a specific issue, but still it's program support for community organizing. So again, general operating, capital, specific programs. Those are the kinds of things you want to look out for. All right, we're going to do one more slide and then I'm going to see if you have any questions. So be thinking of or already putting those in the chat. Let's talk about definitions of things that you might be like, what are they talking about? An RFQ. Sometimes you send in a response to a request for qualifications. This is more on the government grant side. But if you're working with let's say you're working with a nonprofit that is actually applying for a state grant and you're going to go in as a partner, you may have to add to that grant proposal what your qualifications are. And then the nonprofit will do the broader thing of the qualifications. So it's a little different than a proposal. The RFP isn't actually a request for the proposal. So that's the application form itself. RFP. LOI, letter of intent. If you think you want to apply for this grant, sometimes they will ask you for a letter of intent. So Lilly does that, state funders do that. They want to get a sense of how many people are coming in to ask for this money. So a letter of intent, you don't have to have all the details. You probably don't, and they may change by the time you write your proposal, but you do want to say, this is who we are, this is where we are, this is what we're thinking about. It is our intention to apply for this grant on said date for this program that they've published. Bidders Conference information session. Oh, thank goodness they offer these, because it's really a good opportunity to hear from the funder what the heck they're talking about. What is it that they want us to apply for? How do they want to apply? What does this mean? So go. Sometimes they're in person, although these days they're probably all online. So make sure if they're offering them that you go or you send somebody to that session to learn more and to ask questions. And then evaluation, it just means data. And I'll talk a lot more about what that means and how you prepare yourselves for that when we get down the road a little bit. All right, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions that people want to ask about what I've covered so far. Kelly, do you want to?
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. The first is, are denominational grants generally open to churches of other denominations, or are they denomination specific?
That's a really good question. My hunch is they're denomination specific. If somebody else knows differently, please add your thoughts there in the chat.
Okay. Siobhan from a church in New Jersey says, we've run into a problem with the state of New Jersey not accepting grant applications from houses of worship. Is this something new? Is it a nationwide rule that you're aware of? Are there any kinds of ways around these restrictions that you know of?
Well, I don't know about New Jersey. I would get in touch with someone in the office where you think you want to apply for and find out what's driving that decision. There may be some decision behind that we don't know about. If it's across the board, ask other folks in your community if they're seeing the same thing and then try to find out why. One way around that is to partner with a nonprofit who they will fund. So if there's a way to do that, and there may not be, there just may not be, but if there is a way, then that's one way to get through that. But I'd sure look into it and find out what's happening, because I don't know. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So I know, Alison, you talked earlier about operational costs and kind of the inability to get a lot of grants to support that. But if somebody's thinking about a new program and that requires personnel to help get that program off the ground or maintain that program, can you talk a little bit about your experience of the difference between funding people to help support a program versus regular ongoing operational HR costs?
Yes, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a few slides when we're going to go through the specific elements of grants. We'll get to that when we talk about personnel and budget. It's a good question. Yeah, it's a really good question.
Okay. Christopher's asking, how do we find money for weatherization or capital improvements of buildings? Is that something specific to look for?
Yeah, absolutely. So that Episcopal grant that I was talking about, and you may not be in an Episcopal congregation, but they would, my hunch is that they would consider something like that. UI, our local, utility company, also does that kind of work. So you might reach out to your utility company to find out what's available, because they do grants And they do provide some of those services at a very low cost or for free. So check that out. And yes, again, it is it's one of those capital improvements if you're talking about weatherization. And there may be a community foundation or a local family foundation that would be willing to do that. There also, there's an awful lot around environmental justice and grants around that. So I would really explore what are some of those opportunities that might be out there.
Okay. So say that you've gone through the work doing your research and you found something that you think could be a good fit in terms of applying for a grant. How can you find somebody to help you write the grant? You've never done it before. What would you suggest?
Kelly, what would you suggest? Okay, grant writers are out there. You can certainly hire folks, and there are lots of people in that business. You could call your local community foundation to get a list of grant writers. They might know who they are. If you have a friend that works for a nonprofit, ask them who good grant writers are, because they might know. Google is always your friend, but that's kind of dicey. I would really rely on recommendations from folks who have worked with grant writers before, so that you get a really good qualified person. And it doesn't matter so much if they're local, although it could make a difference. It depends on what you're doing. But there are lots of us around. Notice I said us, who are out there and can consult with you on your projects. So I hope that helped answer the question.
Okay. Shauna made a comment in the chat here that Facebook has grant writers groups, so that might be a place to look as well. Yeah. And John asked a question to kind of follow up on the one you just talked about, is, are there any kind of best practices for outsourcing grant writing? Would you really just recommend that people go by recommendation of someone that is a known entity?
I sure would, and that's the only way I did it. When it became clear that I just didn't have time to write the grants the way I used to in my career, we were looking for grant writers, and I relied heavily on folks that came from recommendations from my peers, because you want to trust the person that's writing this grant. You want to look for work they've done before, read a proposal that they've written before, see how you feel about their writing style. Find out how successful they've been. If they're only getting 50% of their proposals funded, I'd be a little careful about that. You want to see that somebody has a good track record. You want to see what kind of proposals they've written before. So, in our case, the one I did hire out somebody specifically to write a big government grant that I really didn't have time to do, and I relied on somebody who had only been funded 100%, and we got it because she'd been funded 100% of the applications, and she only wrote to that specific funding stream and she was really good at it. So use the recommendations that you can find.
Okay. Do you have time for one more, or are you ready to move on?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. There's a couple of questions in here about churches becoming 501c3s.
Yeah.
One person's church has done that. Somebody else is asking about it. Is that helpful in terms of applying for grants?
Oh, heck yeah. Absolutely. And when I was putting this together, I had to be really careful not to go down that stream or to talk about program development or because we're talking about grant writing. But gosh, yes. If you are interested in establishing a nonprofit on your left hand, that's a great thing to do. Of course, why are you doing that? What is it that your nonprofit is going to be doing? But I think that's the wave of the future, you all, that as we see where churches are going, unless you're a mega church with millions of dollars, we have to be creative about what church is. And it may be that you want to create a community development organization, so you can do housing, or you may want to create a school, or there are lots of things that you can do by establishing a nonprofit. So maybe the next webinar, Kelly, that we'll do is on establishing a nonprofit, but we won't talk a whole lot about that today.
Sounds good.
All right, let's move on and keep those questions coming. Well, we're going to go through now. We're going to get down into the weeds a little bit of an application. So, and again, this is one of those weird things. I don't know who you all are or what you've done in terms of writing grants before, but so bear with me if this feels like these are things that you've done before. So in general, here's what you can expect to find in a proposal. Blah, 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 1 through 10. A proposal may have some of these, may have all of these, may have more than this, but these are the basics. And I would suggest that when you think about this, that you don't have to go through this 1 through 10. In fact, you don't want to. You're going to jump around. You're going to start with that program design. That is the heart of your application. So you really have to know, gosh, what is it that we're doing? And then these other pieces will become clear. But for the sake of this webinar, we're going to go through this list 1 to 10. So the summary or the abstract it's really short. It can be called an executive summary. It can be called an abstract, a summary. This is what you're going to write last. You're going to wait till you've written the whole thing so that then you can go back through and just pull a couple of lines from these 5 areas and say, here's the summary. It is really impactful though. So your reader, the grant reader, is going to have a really clear idea of how important this program is when they read this summary. So just because it's short doesn't mean that it's not important. And I'll just say, do it last and don't forget to do it. Okay, so they're usually asked for a history of who you are. That's great. Do that really briefly. This history should not be like, here's our whole 150 years worth of our life. No, you want to say, we started in 1922 and here's some milestones, but here's who we are today, because that's really important. So where are you located? What's the size of your congregation? What are the key characteristics? Who are you? That's what you're going to say about yourself. Who are we? How would you describe yourself to somebody in an elevator? How would you describe yourself to somebody coming to visit your congregation for the first time? What are some of your major accomplishments? And you can kind of define that however you want to. And who's in leadership? Who are your pastors and other leadership? So grants always have a page limit, the applications, and some will have a word or page limit per section. So make sure you adhere to that. But if they don't, and it's just a page limit, just understand you might want to give fewer pages to this, because you want to give more time and more space to your program and actually what you're proposing to do. Okay, so statement of need. This is where it really gets real. Okay, so here's the issue. Here's the problem. Here's the thing we want to address. Here's the thing, right? It could be that you were talking about the increase in homelessness in your area. You could be talking about the characteristics of the very population that you hope to serve. You are going to talk about the impact that your program is going to have on this population, and you're going to say what the solution is. Not in great detail, because that's coming in your description of the program, but you want to get clear about what is the need. So sometimes you're looking at Well, let me give you an example. City of New Haven puts out an RFP, remember, request for proposal for warming center. So in the winter, it's true that there are not enough shelter beds for all the folks that are experiencing homelessness in New Haven. And so somebody came up with this bright idea that for those folks who do not want to go into shelter or who cannot get into shelter, we will open warming centers that are open from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And guess what? Congregations do really well with that because they have great big social halls where people can just come in and sit down overnight. Okay, so there's the RFP. You want to apply for that. Make sure you talk to and understand that you're filling a gap for this population. You're not solving the whole problem of homelessness, but here's your niche. Here's the need. There are not enough beds during the winter. That's what you're addressing, not the whole issue of homelessness. So the more specific you can be about the issue, the problem, the current situation, the more specific you can be about the impact, the clearer your application is going to be. In the same way that you say, well, we want to open a daycare center in our RE wing. Boy, that's great. And you want to be able to say the gap is that there's no affordable childcare in our area. And so we want to do this, and we're going to, partner with XYZ childcare provider and provide affordable childcare services for a particular population. I know I've been talking a lot about programs that are kind of outward facing. Well, that's where I come from. So that's what I know to talk about. You might have a gap within your congregation that you want to apply to your denomination for funding. A lot of what we're seeing now is folks applying for training assistance around DEI, right? DEIB, as we say here, that B meaning belonging. We're seeing congregations apply for things that will help them become greener. Somebody asked that question earlier. Can we apply for weatherization? Yes, you can. So these programs are not always outward facing. They're certainly part of who you are in your context within your own congregation that you think need to be addressed. So again, your statement of need will be, why is this important right now in this time and in this moment in the life of the congregation? And certainly you can make the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Certainly you can make the case for anything toward environmental justice. Okay, that's a statement of need. So objectives. Wow, this is where we tend to get really excited and say, well, I've got about 20 objectives. Oh no, don't do that. You'll never get there. So clearly state your objectives in no more than 3 or 5. 5 is kind of pushing it, I think. If you have 3 objectives, I think that's great. And an objective is your goal. So if you are going to hire a consultant to do DEI work in your congregation, what for? What is it you're aiming to do? What is the goal? What is the objective? Now, here's the challenge in talking about that, and we'll talk a lot more about it when we talk about evaluation, but all these objectives have to be measurable. So when you do your grant report in 6 months or 12 months, you have to be able to say, here's how we are accomplishing these goals. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So again, no more than 3 to 5, and they must be achievable. Don't promise something you can't deliver, because they won't grant it. They'll see that. They've read enough of these to know you can't possibly do that. So only promise to do what you know you can do. Let me check time. Okay, I'm going to scoot on through some of these. Okay, program design. Okay, this is it. How are you doing this? You've laid out the objectives and goals. And actually, when you're writing this, just in terms of your own writing practice, come here first. Do this section first. What is it that we are doing here? What services am I offering? put this first question down at the bottom. What are the services I'm going to offer? I'm going to bring in a consultant to provide diversity, equity, inclusion training to this number of people over this long of time. We're going to do it here in the congregation. We're going to have listening groups, or whatever it is. So be as specific as you can be, and tell us how you're going to reach those goals, because you've just named them up above, or maybe you're going to name them below, but be specific about how you're going to reach these goals. This is the bulk. This is the real piece of the application that's going to make a difference. So be as clear as you can. And again, you'll probably give more of your page numbers to this than anything else. And this is where you can have fun and play with program design. But here's what I also want to tell you, just in terms of your practice of writing a grant. Don't do this by yourself. Don't sit in your office and write this. Well, do. But before you get to writing it, I want to encourage you to sit down with the people who are going to be doing this with you. So absolutely sit with your finance person. If you have a personnel director, or your associate minister, or your sexton, or your the people from the vestry, 2 or 3 people from the congregation. You want to have this a program that you're all on the same page with. And you may think I always thought, well, I know what we need. Well, you know what? I actually didn't. And so I wanted to always bring in our program people to tell me, does this idea make sense? And when it's all said and done, it's the program people that have to deliver the service. So it may be your congregation that has to show up for these trainings. It may be your congregation that is going to volunteer for the warming center. So get their input so that you write a really well-informed program design that's not just coming out of your head, but that is linked to the very work and the very people that will be involved. Okay, somebody asked a question about personnel. Here's where you're going to think about who's going to do this. And I'll tell you, when you get this grant, which you will, the new money coming in can pay for existing staff. You don't have to buy new staff to do this new program unless you need to. I mean, you may actually be doing something that is a whole new thing and you need 10 new staff people to do it. But if it's something that you and your staff can do, great, then you're going to show that. And you're going to say that here, that existing staff are going to do this program, and you'll say, whether you're full or part-time, whether you're salary, however, they're going to ask questions about who are these folks. And they're also going to want to know who's leading, who's driving the boat, steering the ship. So who's the leadership? And volunteers, come on, congregations live with volunteer support. So you want to make sure that you include those as well. And so be thinking about that as you design that program. What's the personnel needs here? Okay, and then evaluation. How are you going to measure this? How are you going to show? Because the funder will ask you to give them a report at 3, 6, or 12 months. Probably not 12 months, because they don't want to read all those other reports. But at 12 months, you're going to write them to say, here's how we did. Here was our impact. Here's how many people that we impacted. So, for example, by September, we will serve 200 meals at the new soup kitchen for low-income residents. And you're going to, well, you did in the 200 meals. So that's an example of, here's what we're going to do. So in your proposal, you will tell them how you will measure success. You will tell them how you're going to gather data and how you will use the data. Not just hardcore data with numbers, but also kind of that information that you gather from storytelling, right? What are you hearing from the people that you serve? What are you hearing from the people that underwent the DEI training? What are you hearing from people who are so proud that your facility is now environmentally more sustainable? So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. And think now about, gosh, do we know how to do that? Can we do that? How are we going to do that? And then we're going to get to the budget. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that. I see that we only have about 30 more minutes. So get your finance person, whether it's the finance director on your board or your paid staff, get them in from the very beginning. Let them know what you're thinking about, how much it's going to cost. How are we going to work this into an existing budget if we can? What can we add to it? What other, what does the financial situation look like? How much money do we need to do this? Funders often want to know who else is paying for this. If you've got a big budget, let's say of $25,000, and they're only going to offer 15, maybe that's their funding cap for this particular funding stream or grant opportunity. Where are you applying for other funding? And it may be that you say, look, we've got this much money already in our budget and we need your money to close the gap so we can do this thing. That's great. They love that. They want to see that you're secure. But you can also say in a budget narrative that you've got a certain amount of money that you're applying for that you don't have yet, but you're also applying for additional money. Be sure that you look at what are allowable costs. So there may be some restrictions on what a funder will pay for that and what they won't. And so don't include in your request for funding something that they're not going to pay for. You can show how you're going to cover that cost either within your existing budget or from other money that you're going to apply for. So just keep that in mind. Okay, and then usually there's a little bit of a conclusion at the end of a grant, and here's where you're so tired. You're so tired of writing this thing, and you think, gosh, how do I say this differently? Because and Kelly will laugh when she hears me say this, that they asked me this question 10 pages ago, and now I have to say it again. Yes, you do. Yeah, it's redundant, and lots of times they're just grossly redundant. Say it again anyway, and say it a little bit differently. And in this concluding section, you want it to be the most impactful statement you can make. So not just about the impact you're going to have, but the statement itself has to go, wow, this is awesome what they're applying for. And we really want to find out more about this congregation because we think we want to fund them. So, pay attention to that detail. Sleep on it and write it the next day, but make sure that it is saying why you are the congregation that should be funded for this particular thing. And be bold, you guys. Be bold. You have something to be proud of, and you're going to say that. You have something that you think is really going to work, and you're going to say that in a way that helps them to believe it too. Okay, enough about that. The last piece is going to be, they're going to ask for other documentation, probably who's on your governance body, who's on the vestry, who's on the board. The most important thing in this is letters of support. So if you are working in collaboration with another organization, of course, you're going to trade letters back and forth. If it's not an official collaboration, but let's say you are opening that, you want to open the warming center, please have a letter of support from the organization that provides services for people who are homeless in your area. And other pastors, because maybe you want volunteers from other congregations to help you, because this is a really heavy lift to have this volunteer driven. So you get it, right? Letters of support from the folks who are actually really want you to do this or will benefit from it, or who are actually working with you to do this particular program. And then the final thing I say about a conclusion is make a copy for yourself, a full copy of the whole thing, and make a hard copy. Make sure you've got it where you know where it is, and it doesn't get lost. And I'm not going to even say why you need to do that. Finally, I think I said this before, submit it on time. If there's a deadline of 11 o'clock on Thursday, March 2nd, turn it in at 10. Don't wait. If you have to drive to Hartford to turn it in, leave at 8. make sure you have time to get it where, if you're doing it online, give yourself time. Don't wait till 10:30 because something may happen. Your computer might freeze. So you just want to make sure that you give yourself that window to get it where it needs to go on time. Obviously, I have some experience of not doing that, so I'm telling you again to make sure that you do that. Okay, tips for success real quick, and then we'll do some questions in our last half hour. So you found the organization that's you think might fund you. You found the RFP. Read it all the way through, and think of all the things that you've just learned, the things you want to watch out for to make sure that you're a fit. Make sure that what you're proposing fits with what these funders are asking for. And the only way to do that is read it all the way through. Also, if you read it all the way through, you'll know that there's some pieces of this RFP that you better start working on right now because you need 60 days to get that information together. So identify what those are and make sure when you put your timeline together that you start working on those things like letters of support to make sure that you have them in hand when it's time to submit. I said before, get your team together. Don't do this out of your own head, but please, please talk to the folks that are with you in your congregation, your staff, your finance person on the board, your board members, other members of the congregation, get their ideas. Oh gosh, it would be so easy to let's just write. No, follow the directions completely. If they say it's 2 pages for this, only do 2 pages. If it's 10,000 characters, only do 10,000 characters. Follow the directions completely and exactly, or else they will throw it out. People are getting so many applications now, they'll do anything to discard them as they come in so that they can at least narrow down the field, right? So don't add anything that it doesn't ask for. Don't add flourishes that you think will help because they're not going to look at them. 12-point font Times New Roman. It's easier to read. And you want to make it easy for the readers to look at this. Okay, y'all, here's the hard thing. No preaching, and I mean that. And I do it too. I can get on my soapbox about homelessness and I can preach through an RFP, but that's not what they want to hear. I've read applications to Lilly Foundation that's a sermon. That's not what they want. You're not theologizing in this application. You're saying this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And yeah, there might be a little theology in there, but remember, you've got a page limit and they want to know what you're doing. So then I'm going to say no preaching. Okay, do make contact with the program officer or somebody in that office. Remember, I said in the beginning, part of this is about networking, so know who they are and make sure they know who you are. Again, know the deadline, not just for when it's due, but so that you can schedule your own time accordingly. All right, Kelly asked me to do this webinar months ago. I've been thinking about it since then, and I've put it together, to some extent, and I know I have a certain time. You've got to preach on Sunday. Don't tell me you write that sermon on Saturday. You know how to create a timeline. You've got to give yourself time. You really have to do this because there's always something unexpected that's going to happen. So put together a calendar and map out how you're going to get this done. Every RFP is different. Every RFQ, every application is different. So don't copy what you did last year. Oh my goodness, the city of New Haven would ask us to apply for funding for the same program every single year. It just infuriated us because I couldn't just copy, even though the program hadn't changed, I couldn't copy what I submitted last year or they were going to throw it out. So don't just copy because they don't want you to do that. Don't copy what you did last year. Don't copy what somebody else wrote. These are all different. So again, pay attention to the detail of this proposal that's on your desk. And again, don't promise anything that you can't do. Be true to yourself and be true to the RFP. I am done talking. We have about 22 minutes left for questions and so forth. So let me close out this share and I'll get on the screen and let's have some conversation and questions. Kelly, you want to Tell me
Sure. Before I get to questions, I just want to share a grant writing experience that I had that involved Allison. Back in November, somebody at YDS walked into my office and gave me a copy of a grant proposal and said, you should apply for this grant for X. Well, I looked at it and very clearly the program that was suggested to me was not appropriate for that grant. But I started thinking about it and thought, well, but it could be really appropriate for this other thing that we're doing. And maybe it makes sense for us to apply. And I looked at the deadline, and the deadline was February. And I thought, oh, I have so much time. Plus, I was frozen by imposter syndrome because I had never written a grant before. So I kind of let it go for the holidays. Then after the holidays, panic set in. And I turned to Allison and said, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've taken a grant writing class online, but I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? So I just want to reiterate something that she said and go back to some of her final points. She said, just start writing. If you have an idea, if there's something that is exciting to you that you think you want to do, this could be appropriate for, just start writing. So that's what I did. And I wrote about 5 pages of thoughts and ideas and X and Y. And then I was like, okay, I can kind of see this, but there are all these requirements. It's very overwhelming. And then Alison said, just answer the questions they ask. Now that you have your ideas, now that you know what you want to do, just go back and answer the questions. And I did. And I don't know if we'll get that grant or not, but it was a great and important experience to go through it. And then she did say, don't just write, like be very specific. Yes, but first just dream and envision and write whatever you're thinking about. Let the ideas flow and then come back and follow the steps that they're asking for. So that's just my experience. And thank you, Alison, for helping me through that experience.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. And I'll be quick that in all these grant applications, there will be, when I listed program design and talked a little bit about that, that's called the narrative section. And you'll usually have prompting questions within that. And there might be 5 or 6 or more. Just answer the question. They're very straightforward. They're very clear. And don't go, that's again, like don't preach, don't go off on this tangent. Just answer the question as clearly as possible. Because it's not anything more than that. They're not asking for more than that. They simply want you to answer the question. Okay, questions from you, Kelly.
Okay, so one question we have is, if you're applying to multiple funders, should you inform each funder about making parallel requests? And if so, how do you do that?
Not necessarily. Lovely if you get all that money, and then what are you going to do with it all? But unless they ask you specifically, I mean, you can say we are applying to these 3 organizations for funding. You can say that, and they may ask you again. I think I said earlier, they may want to know who else, because they don't want to be the sole funder, and most funders don't want to be. So who else is going to fund you? So you'll prepare a budget, and there will be a budget narrative, which is where you can explain those pieces of your budget. And that's where you will say, we are applying to XYZ for da, 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 da. So it doesn't hurt.
Okay. What happens if your best plan and intentions fall short at, say, 6 months or a year? How do you prepare for this at the writing step and then at the evaluation step? Fear of failure, I find, can be the biggest hurdle to starting the grant process. How afraid of failure should one be?
Please help me. Failure in writing the grant, or the program fails?
This is Erin. Erin, I'm going to guess you mean the program is not panning out.
Yeah. If you see your program starting to flounder, you build it. Yeah, I know that one. First, call your team together and brainstorm about what's happening here. We thought we'd launched this big program. We thought it would be successful. What if nobody shows up? Gather other folks together, gather those people that did participate and find out why they participated. It might help you then bring more people in. I'm gathering from your comment that you built something and nobody showed up. Be honest with your program officer from the get-go. If you see that 3 months in something isn't working, I wouldn't hesitate to call to say, hey, you know what? We thought this was really going to work, but it's not. Can you help us think about this? They may have seen something similar in another grant application. They may be able to direct you to some expert advice that could help you, but don't wait till the end to say it failed. We were worried when we wrote our Lily grant here that we wouldn't get students to participate or congregations to participate. How would we deal with that? Well, I would have gone back to Lily to say, hey, you know, what are we doing wrong here? So honesty is always your best kind of step. And I wouldn't hesitate to contact the people that funded you to say, we've got some problems. What can you help us with this? Yeah, but don't let it fail and then tell them you failed.
Okay, what's the best way to go about writing a grant application for an existing program that's growing?
Yeah, great. Do it. Do it. I mean, that's what I did all throughout my time at Columbus House. Because that's what we did. We grew. And so you might find that your food program is growing. Well, I'm sorry that it is, because that means more people are in need, but it's clear, just look around us, that more people are in need. So you write in the same way to say we have an existing food program. Clearly we're not meeting the need, identify the gaps, say why you need to expand. It's the same kind of thing. You just have to think about it a little bit differently. It's not a new program. We're expanding. There may be some new twist you're putting to that expansion, and you might want to include that. But I think funders understand that some of these basic needs programs have to expand because the needs are so much greater than they were when they first funded them.
Yeah, there was a question that popped up about how do you start finding funding sources. Alison had listed some sources at the very beginning of the presentation, and we'll be sharing her PowerPoint with everyone afterwards. So those will be listed there. And as she said, Google is your best friend in terms of getting started with this type of thing. Erica asks, we have a virtual church that does outreach. Starting out now. Will this be a problem with getting grants, having a virtual location, but we gather monthly to give back to the community? So do you see any disconnect there between funding for something that's virtual outreach versus in person?
The church is virtual and the outreach is in person, or the church, it's all virtual? I mean, it doesn't matter either way, because I don't know the answer to that question. My hunch is that we are all getting used to virtual church, right? I mean, I've known several congregations that are just virtual, and I think funders are kind of reconciling to that's what some churches may look like now. And so I wouldn't hesitate to say we have virtual church, but we meet once a month and we do dinner for $1, or we do outreach on the green, or whatever. But I think you just have to go for it, because I do think it is the age that we're living in, that's how we're seeing church a lot.
Okay. So when grant proposals ask for metrics that you don't have firm numbers on, like how many people your program has impacted and how many people it will impact, how do you answer those questions?
Yeah, best guess. I'm sorry, but that's real. So figure out how you can start to keep that data, because it will be important, and you want to get a little bit more intentional about that. Let's say one of the churches in Hamden is doing dinner for $1, so they count how many people come in to have a meal. They count how many people show up at the food truck. They count how many people visit. So you just have to figure out how do we count? How do I count these numbers? If you don't, in a proposal, you are proposing something, right? So you don't have a hard and fast number, but you've done a little bit of research to know what are the gaps that I'm addressing. So if you say that we want to do a food pantry here because we know that USNH is not meeting the need and they have more people than they can provide food for, find out how many people are they turning away. And then you can say in the grant, look, we know that, there's this gap that so many people can't get food because these congregations are turning people away. So do what you can to kind of dig at something that gives you a handle on the numbers. They're never going to be concrete because it's a proposal. But at the end of 6 months, you need to be able to tell them how many people you served.
Okay, Selena's asking, when working with collaborators, how do you avoid overlapping with each other? And I'm going to ask Celine, do you want to unmute for a second and tell us a little bit what you mean by that? Are both parties applying for the grant, or what are you referring to?
Well, when we work with a community foundation, that's where we get our best grants.
Good.
What we've discovered is what we do is we fundraise for 6 different organizations that serve kids.
Okay.
And what we discovered is that sometimes those organizations apply to the same community foundation.
Sure.
We also discovered that we have 2 major outreach programs in our parish. One has a budget of 600 plus, no, I don't know how big their budget is, because they serve meals 7 days a week and 8 meals a week. The other one, which is us, we're much smaller. Our budget for next year would be about $122,000. So how do we avoid the overlap with all the nonprofits that we work with?
Yeah. No, that's such a real issue, because there's so many of us that want to do these kinds of basic needs programs, right? Well, figure it out internally. When you said, I was a little bit confused about, you said this program is doing this and this program is doing this. Are those in the same congregation, or are they?
No, the 2 in the same congregation, we use the same fiduciary agent, which is the congregation. And that one, I think we figured out.
Okay.
But since we raise money for 6 different organizations that serve kids, and all the kids have the same basic need,
Mm-hmm.
they're all underserved. They all, they fit in the poverty range.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid
Overlap
with those people?
Yeah. Well, conversations are always helpful. Find out, okay, who are you serving and where are these kids coming from? Are they all from the same neighborhood? Are they from different? How can you differentiate who you're serving and what you're offering? Is there a way to do that, or is it absolutely overlap? And if it is there a gap that's not being addressed, and can you shift to address that gap instead of this overlap? In some communities, there are emerging like a food council network. So all of the organizations that provide soup kitchens or food banks are coming together, and I think that's a great way to name what you're doing and to bring out into the open where there's overlap, so that you can stop doing that, because we don't want to waste that money. And not that it's a waste, but you know what I mean, there's gaps that need to be addressed. So I might think about creating something like that, or joining something like that if it exists. The homeless services providers do it. I think there are education councils. So try to either create it or tap into something like that that's going on. Because funders don't want to pay for that kind of overlap. I don't know if that was helpful or not. Pass through. So a pass-through organization, typically you'll see that language in government grants, local, state, or federal grants. I might write a grant for another organization. I might partner through another organization with another organization. And so the pass-through might be Columbus House, and the money goes to the congregation who's doing the work. It kind of depends on what grant you're talking about, but it's generally that whoever applies is not getting the funding, but it's going through. And you could think of that as a fiscal agent. The fiscal agent might get the grant and then pass it through to other organizations. So in the case of homeless service, for instance, there is one organization that applies for all of our HUD grants, and then they pass that down to all of us, or pass it through to all of us. So that's what a pass-through is. They might keep a tiny little bit for administration, because it does cost to do that. They have to do the reporting, so they're probably going to keep a little administrative fee to be the lead or the applicant.
Okay, any further questions for Alison? I want to thank everybody for being with us today. And Alison, thank you for taking so much of your time to walk us through this. I know it was a lot of information. A lot of people have asked about getting the recording and the slides, and yes, all of that will be made available to everyone. We'll send out an email with a link. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to let us know.